The red sky above Kepler 442b burned with the light of dying ships. Commander Veltar pressed his scaled hand against the observation window of his underground bunker and watched another Zephyrian fighter craft explode in a ball of orange flame. The Void Swarm had been attacking his world for 3 long months, and his people were losing badly. The insectoid invaders came in waves that never seemed to end. Their black ships moved like angry insects across the crimson sky, dropping biomechanical drones that consumed everything in their path. 12 other worlds in this sector had already fallen to these creatures, and now Kepler 442b was next on their list. Veltar turned away from the window and looked at the tactical display showing his planet's defense grid. Red warning lights blinked everywhere as shield generators failed one by one. His purple-scaled warriors fought bravely on the surface, but their energy weapons barely scratched the enemy's adaptive armor. The Void Swarm learned from every attack and grew stronger each. 2 million Zephyrian civilians huddled in shelters deep beneath the planet's crust. Families that had lived peacefully for generations now faced extinction at the hands of an enemy that saw all life as nothing more than fuel for their endless hunger. Children who should have been playing in the crystal gardens now cowered in darkness while their parents prepared for a final battle they could not win that far above the planet's atmosphere. Captain Jake Morrison of the human observation vessel UCS Endeavour monitored the desperate situation through long-range sensors. His orders were clear: observe and report back to Earth Command. Humans were not supposed to interfere in galactic conflicts, but Jake found it hard to watch an entire species die while he did nothing. Lieutenant Amy Chun sat at the communication station beside him, her dark eyes filled with concern as she translated the Zephyrian distress calls. Their language was musical, even in desperation, filled with harmonies that spoke of courage in the face of certain death. She had been listening to their transmissions for weeks and felt like she knew these people personally. The bridge of the UCS Endeavour was quiet except for the steady hum of life, support systems, and the occasional beep from monitoring equipment. Jake's crew of 30 humans had volunteered for this deep space mission to gather intelligence on the Void Swarm threat. They were supposed to stay hidden at the edge of the solar system, but Jake kept moving closer despite his orders. Amy translated another message from Commander Veltar to his scattered forces. The Zephyrian commander was telling his warriors to make every shot count because ammunition was running low. Their factories had been destroyed in the first week of the invasion, and supply ships could not break through the enemy blockade. Jake clenched his fists as he watched the tactical display. The Void Swarm had deployed harvester ships in orbit. AROUND Kepler 442b. These massive biomechanical constructs would drain the planet's core of all precious metals and energy sources within days. After that, the world would be nothing but a lifeless husk drifting through space. On the planet's surface, Zephyrian warriors made their last stand in the ruins of New Zephyr City. The capital had once been a shining example of their peaceful civilization, with crystal spires reaching toward the sky and gardens filled with exotic plants from across the galaxy. Now it was a battlefield covered in rubble and the bodies of the fallen. Commander Veltar, second in command, Major Catherine, entered the bunker with fresh damage reports. 3 more shield generators had failed in the eastern sector, and enemy drones were already moving through the breach. They had maybe 6 hours before the protective barriers around the civilian shelters collapsed completely. The Zephyrians had tried everything they could think of to stop the invasion. Their best scientists worked around the clock to develop new weapons, but the Void Swarm's biomechanical technology adapted faster than they could innovate. Every plasma rifle, every energy cannon, every defensive system became useless within hours of deployment. Jake received another priority message from Earth Command ordering him to maintain his distance and avoid detection. Admiral Harrison wanted detailed intelligence reports, but refused to authorize any military intervention. Humanity had stayed neutral in galactic conflicts for over 2 centuries, and the Terran Council was not about to change that policy now. Amy intercepted a personal transmission from a Zephyrian, mother to her daughter in another shelter system. The woman was singing a traditional lullaby while explosions shook the ground above her head. She promised her child that the crystal gardens would bloom again someday, and that their people would remember this darkness, but not be defeated by it. The Void Swarm drones were unlike anything the galaxy had seen before. They appeared to be part machine and part living organism, with chitinous armor that could restructure itself to resist different types of weapons. Their neural networks allowed them to share information instantly across vast distances, making them incredibly efficient hunters. Dr. Lisa Park, back on Earth, had been studying captured Void Swarm specimens for months. Her research suggested that their hive mind might be their greatest weakness as well as their strength. If someone could disrupt their quantum-entangled neural connections, entire formations might collapse into chaos. But her theories remained untested, and Earth Command showed little interest in practical applications. Commander Veltar stood before a holographic map of his world and tried to find some way to buy more time for the civilian evacuation. His military advisors had all given up hope, but he refused to surrender while a single Zephyrian child remained in danger. Their warrior code demanded that they fight until the very end, no matter how hopeless the situation appeared. The underground shelters were running out of food and medical supplies. Wounded civilians lay on makeshift beds, while volunteer medics did their best with limited resources. The artificial lighting systems were failing one by one, leaving many areas in near total darkness. Fear and despair spread through the tunnels. Like a disease. Jake made a decision that would change his life forever. He ordered his navigation officer to plot a course closer to Kepler 442b, despite his standing orders. The UCS Endeavour was not a warship, but it carried enough firepower to make a difference in a planetary defense. His crew looked at him with surprise, but none of them objected to the order. Amy opened a secure channel to Earth and began composing an unauthorized message to General Pete Davis at Terran Defense Force Headquarters. She included detailed analysis of the Zephyrian situation and tactical assessments of Void Swarm capabilities. Her report painted a picture of brave people facing extinction while the galaxy's most powerful military force stood by and watched. The message would take several hours to reach Earth through quantum communication relays. By then, Kepler 442b might already be lost. Jake knew he was risking his career and possibly his life by defying direct orders. But some things were more important than following regulations. The image of those Zephyrian children singing in the darkness would haunt him forever if he did nothing. Commander Veltar received word that the northern defensive line had collapsed completely. Enemy forces were advancing toward the main civilian shelters, and his remaining warriors were falling back in disarray. The Void Swarm had deployed new types of biomechanical creatures that could burrow through solid rock, making underground fortifications useless. As night fell across the embattled world, both Jake Morrison and Veltar faced impossible choices. The human captain had sworn an oath to protect Earth's interests, but found himself caring more about alien civilians than his own career. The Zephyrian commander had promised to defend his people, but lacked the weapons and troops needed to fulfill that promise. In the depths of space, the UCS Endeavour moved steadily toward a dying world, while its crew prepared for whatever came next. They were about to learn that sometimes the greatest victories come from the most desperate moments, when ordinary people find the courage to do extraordinary things. The galaxy was about to discover what humans were really capable of when they decided to care. General Pete Davis sat in the emergency council chamber, deep beneath the Rocky Mountains, and stared at the holographic display showing the Kepler-442b system. Amy Chun's unauthorized transmission had reached Earth 6 hours ago, and the images of dying Zephyrians filled every screen in the room. The old soldier had seen many battles in his 40 years of service, but nothing quite like the systematic extinction of an entire species. Senator Mary Johnson paced back and forth across the polished floor, her heels clicking against the metal. Surface with each step. She represented the isolationist faction on the Terran Council and believed strongly that humanity should never interfere in alien conflicts. Earth had remained neutral for over 200 years, and that policy had kept. And safe from the endless wars that plagued the galaxy. Senator Bill Thompson disagreed completely, and his voice echoed off the chamber walls as he argued for immediate military intervention. He had studied the Void Swarm intelligence reports and knew that these creatures would not stop with just one world. If they succeeded in consuming Kepler-442b, they would grow stronger and eventually threaten human space as well. The debate had been going on for hours while thousands of innocent civilians died on a distant world. General Davis listened to both sides, but his mind kept returning to the final transmission from Commander Valtar. The Zephyrian officer had spoken with quiet dignity about his people's determination to fight until the end, even knowing they could not win. There was something noble about such courage that stirred the general's warrior heart. Dr. Lisa Park entered the chamber carrying a datapad filled with her latest research on void swarm biology. Her work at the Terran Science Institute had revealed crucial weaknesses in their hive mind structure. The creatures used quantum-entangled neural networks to coordinate their attacks across vast distances. But this same connection made them vulnerable to specific types of electromagnetic interference. Captain Jake Morrison had moved the UCS Endeavour to within 1 light hour of Kepler-442b against direct orders from Admiral Harrison. His crew worked frantically to boost their sensor arrays and gather detailed tactical information about enemy forces. Every piece of data they collected might save lives if Earth decided to intervene in the conflict. Amy Chun monitored Zephyrian communications from her station on the bridge, and her heart broke with each desperate message. Families were saying goodbye to each other as the defensive perimeter collapsed around their shelters. Parents sang lullabies to frightened children while explosions shook the ground above their heads. The musical language of the Zephyrians had become a symphony of sorrow. Back on Earth, the emergency session continued as more reports arrived from the battle zone. The Void Swarm had deployed massive harvester ships that were already beginning to drain mineral resources from Kepler-442b's crust. Within 72 hours, the planet would be stripped of everything valuable and left as a dead rock floating in space. Senator Johnson argued that sending human forces would only result in unnecessary casualties for Earth's military. The Terran Defense Force had never fought against biomechanical opponents, and their tactics were untested against such adaptive enemies. She believed it was better to learn from the Zephyrian defeat and prepare defenses for humanity's own worlds. Senator Thompson countered that allowing genocide to happen when they had the power to prevent it would stain humanity's honor forever. He read excerpts from Commander Valtar's transmissions, describing how Zephyrian warriors continued fighting even when their weapons proved useless. Such courage deserved support from anyone who claimed to value freedom and justice. General Davis called for a brief recess and walked to his private office adjacent to the council chamber. The walls were covered with medals and commendations from decades of service, but also photographs of the soldiers who had died under his command. Every military decision carried the weight of lives that might be lost, and this choice was bigger than any he had ever faced. Dr. Park followed him and spread her research across his desk. The electromagnetic frequencies needed to disrupt void swarm neural networks could be generated by modified communications arrays on Terran warships. The effect would cascade through their hive mind and cause temporary paralysis in entire formations of enemy drones. It was not a permanent solution, but might give defending forces the advantage they needed. Admiral Harrison contacted the facility from his flagship in Earth orbit and demanded to know why Captain Morrison had violated his orders. The UCS Endeavour was supposed to maintain safe distance and avoid detection by hostile forces. Instead, Jake had moved close enough to the battle zone to risk discovery and possible destruction of his ship and crew. Jake ignored the Admiral's threats and continued gathering intelligence data. His tactical officer reported that Void swarm forces were preparing for a final assault on the remaining Zephyrian strongholds. The enemy had learned to counter every defensive strategy and seemed confident that victory was within their grasp. Time was running out for any rescue attempt. Amy translated a transmission from a group of Zephyrian children trapped in a collapsed shelter. They were singing a traditional song about heroes who would come from the stars to save their world in its darkest hour. The innocent faith in their voices brought tears to her eyes as she realized that no such heroes existed in reality. The Terran Council reconvened after the recess, and Senator Johnson presented her final arguments against military intervention. Earth's neutrality had prevented involvement in dozens of galactic conflicts over the centuries. Breaking that tradition now would make humanity a target for every aggressive species in the galaxy and potentially lead to war on multiple fronts. Thompson responded by showing images of Zephyrian refugees huddled in their underground shelters. These were not warriors or politicians, but ordinary families caught in a nightmare beyond their control. How could humanity claim to be civilized if they allowed such suffering to continue when they had the power to stop it? General Davis stood up and addressed the council with the authority that came from decades of military leadership. He had made his decision and would accept full responsibility for whatever consequences followed. The Terran Defense Force would deploy to Kepler 442b within 12 hours to assist in planetary defense operations against the Void Swarm invasion. Senator Johnson objected strongly and demanded a formal vote by the full council. She argued that no single military officer had the authority to commit Earth to an interstellar war without proper political approval. The decision was too important to be made by one person, regardless of their rank or experience. But General Davis had already activated Protocol 7, an emergency provision that allowed the TDF commander to respond to immediate threats against human interests. He interpreted the Void Swarm's expansion as such a threat and refused to waste more time on political debates. While innocent people died, Dr. Park began coordinating with TDF technical teams to install her electromagnetic disruption systems on the fleet's capital ships. The modifications would take several hours to complete and required precise calibration to avoid affecting friendly forces. Her theoretical research was about to be tested in actual combat conditions. Captain Morrison received notification that a full battle fleet was being assembled in Earth orbit. Admiral Kate Williams would command the naval forces while Colonel Sam Parker led the ground troops. The UCS Endeavour would serve as advance, reconnaissance, and provide targeting data for the main assault force when it arrived. Amy sent a coded message to Commander Veltar informing him that human reinforcements were coming. She could not reveal specific details about timing or force strength, but wanted the Zephyrian commander to know that his people had not been abandoned by the galaxy. Help was on the way, even if it might arrive too late. The Zephyrian commander received Amy's transmission while fighting a desperate rearguard action in the ruins of his capital city. He had never heard of humans before, but any ally was welcome at this point. His warriors were down to their last energy cells, and the civilian evacuation was still incomplete. as Earth's most powerful warships prepared for immediate deployment. Both species faced an uncertain future. The Zephyrians fought for survival, while hoping that strangers from a distant world would risk everything to save them. The humans prepared to abandon centuries of neutrality for the sake of people they had never met but refused to abandon. The galaxy was about to witness something unprecedented in its long history of conflict and conquest. The space around Kepler 442b suddenly filled with the bright flashes of hyperspace exits S-300. Human warships materialized in perfect formation. The Terran Defense Force had arrived in overwhelming numbers, their gray and blue hulls gleaming in the light of the distant red star. At the center of the fleet, a massive battleship UCS Liberty served as Admiral Kate, Williams' flagship and command center for the entire operation. Commander Veltar stood in his underground bunker and watched the tactical display with amazement as hundreds of new contacts appeared on his sensors. The human fleet had emerged from hyperspace with military precision that spoke of years of training and preparation. Their ships moved in coordinated patterns that confused the void swarms targeting systems and created gaps in the enemy formation. Admiral Williams sat in her command chair and surveyed the battlefield through the Liberty's main view screen. The void swarm had positioned their biomechanical vessels in a tight blockade around the planet, but their formation was designed to prevent escape rather than repel invasion. Her tactical officers quickly identified weak points in their defensive screen and began planning attack vectors. Colonel Sam Parker stood in the main hangar bay of the UCS Liberty and addressed his ground forces before the first wave of dropships launched. 3,000 human Marines waited in their powered armor, weapons checked, and ready for combat. These were Earth's finest soldiers, veterans of conflicts across the solar system who had volunteered for humanity's first interstellar military operation. Captain Jake Morrison felt a surge of pride as he watched the massive fleet take positions around his small observation vessel. The UCS Endeavour had provided crucial intelligence during the approach and now served as a forward reconnaissance platform. His crew had been the first humans to witness Zephyrian courage, and they would be among the first to fight, alongside their new alien allies. The first wave of human dropships launched from carrier vessels throughout the fleet and streaked toward Kepler 442b's surface like falling stars. Sergeant Danny Rodriguez commanded the lead assault team and felt his stomach tighten as they passed through the planet's atmosphere. Anti-aircraft fire from Void Swarm positions lit up the sky around them, but the dropship's armor held against the biomechanical weapons. Dr. Lisa Park worked frantically in the Liberty's science bay to calibrate her electromagnetic disruption systems. The neural network frequencies she had discovered in her Earth laboratory needed precise adjustment to account for local conditions. Lieutenant Tom Bradley assisted her while monitoring Void Swarm communications for signs that their jamming efforts were having an effect. Commander Veltar received his first direct communication from human forces when Major Chris Taylor contacted him through secure channels. The scarred human officer spoke through a translation device and offered tactical support for the defense of the remaining civilian shelters. Despite the language barrier, both soldiers recognized the warrior spirit in each other's voices. Sergeant Rodriguez's dropship touched down in a cleared area near the ruins of New Zephyr City and immediately came under fire from Void Swarm drones. The biomechanical creatures had adapted their weapons to counter Zephyrian energy shields, but seemed confused by human kinetic projectiles and explosive weapons. Their chitinous armor could deflect plasma bolts, but struggled against good old-fashioned bullets. The human Marines spread out in combat formation and advanced toward the nearest Zephyrian defensive position. Corporal Jenny Lewis led her squad through rubble-filled streets while maintaining radio contact with orbital support. The destroyed city reminded her of urban warfare zones back on Earth. Except here the enemy was part machine and part living nightmare. Admiral Williams coordinated the space battle with clinical precision, while their ships engaged the Void Swarm blockade. Human vessels used unconventional attack patterns that their enemies had never encountered before. Commander Paul Davis led fighter squadrons in rapid strikes against enemy command ships, exploiting gaps in their formation that biomechanical thinking could not anticipate. Major Taylor reached Commander Veltar's bunker and was amazed by the Zephyrian commander's dignity despite the desperate situation. The purple-scaled alien stood nearly 8 feet tall, but carried himself with the quiet authority that marked true military leadership. Through their translation devices, the two officers quickly developed mutual respect and began coordinating their defensive strategies. Dr. Park's electromagnetic pulse weapon reached full power just as the largest Void Swarm assault began. The neural disruptor sent waves of interference through quantum space and caused immediate chaos in enemy formations. Entire battalions of biomechanical drones suddenly stopped moving as their hive mind connections were severed by the human technology. Sergeant Rodriguez exploited the confusion by leading his Marines through enemy lines toward trapped Zephyrian civilians. Private Kelly Foster worked with local scouts to navigate the underground tunnel systems, while Staff Sergeant Nick Thompson improvised explosives from mining equipment left behind in the evacuation. Human adaptability proved more valuable than any advanced weapon system. The Zephyrian warriors fought with renewed hope as they watched human soldiers advance fearlessly against enemies that had terrorized the galaxy. Captain Jim Baker coordinated combined operations between species using hand signals and basic tactical concepts that transcended language barriers. Trust developed quickly between soldiers facing death together. Admiral Williams noticed that Void Swarm command ships were trying to adapt to human tactics by studying their attack patterns. She ordered her fleet to switch strategies every few minutes, never allowing the enemy to predict their next move. The biomechanical intelligence that made them so dangerous against other species became a liability. When facing human unpredictability, Commander Veltar joined Major Taylor in a desperate assault on Void Swarm positions, threatening the main civilian shelter. The unlikely partnership between human and Zephyrian officers inspired both their forces to fight harder than either thought possible. They pushed through enemy defenses block by bloody block, leaving trails of destroyed drones in their wake. Lieutenant Amy Chun maintained communications between all human units while translating Zephyrian tactical reports. Her work proved crucial in coordinating joint operations between species that had never fought together before. She found that military terminology translated easily once soldiers learned to trust each other's courage and competence. Dr. Park detected massive energy readings from the northern polar region of Kepler 442b and realized the Void Swarm had hidden their primary control node beneath the ice cap. The facility was heavily defended, but represented the key to their entire operation. Destroying it would cripple their forces across multiple star systems and save countless worlds from future invasion. Captain Morrison volunteered to lead the mission against the control node, despite the obvious dangers involved. His crew had started this intervention by defying orders to help strangers, and they were determined to see it through to the end. Commander Veltar insisted on joining the assault team, arguing that his knowledge of local geography would be essential. The battle for Kepler 442b raged across the planet's surface as human and Zephyrian forces pushed deeper into enemy territory. Void Swarm drones that had seemed invincible just hours before now fell to coordinated attacks by soldiers who refused to give up. The tide was turning, but victory would require sacrifices that neither species fully understood yet. Sergeant Rodriguez reached the civilian shelters and found thousands of Zephyrian families huddled in the darkness. Children who had been singing songs about heroes from the stars now saw those heroes in person, wearing human faces and carrying weapons that could drive back the nightmares. The grateful tears of alien parents needed no translation dot as the first. Day of joint combat operations drew to a close. Both human and Zephyrian forces had learned valuable lessons about cooperation under fire. Species barriers meant nothing when courage and determination were shared between warriors. A galaxy was witnessing the birth of an alliance that would change the balance of power among the stars. The final phase of the battle would require everything both species could give, but they faced it together with confidence born from shared sacrifice. Earth's warriors had proven themselves worthy allies, while the Zephyrians had shown that some things were worth fighting for regardless of the odds. Together, they prepared to strike at the heart of an enemy that had never known defeat. The northern polar region of Kepler 442b stretched before the joint assault team like a frozen wasteland of ice and rock. Captain Jake Morrison led the combined human Zephyrian force across the treacherous terrain while massive ice storms whipped around them with hurricane-force winds. The Void Swarm control node lay hidden beneath 2 miles of solid ice, protected by automated defenses that had never faced determined attackers. Commander Veltar moved beside Jake through the blinding snow, his purple scales already turning white with frost despite his environmental suit. The Zephyrian officer had insisted on joining this suicide mission even though his own forces needed him elsewhere. Some battles required personal leadership, and destroying the enemy command center was too important to delegate to subordinates. Lieutenant Amy Chun crouched behind an ice ridge and tried to maintain communications with orbital support while quantum interference from the control node scrambled their radio signals. Dr. Lisa Park's electromagnetic weapon had disrupted the Void Swarms coordination across most of the planet, but this facility still functioned independently and posed a threat to the entire operation. Sergeant Danny Rodriguez led his Marine squad through the outer defensive perimeter, while biomechanical sentries emerged from hidden positions in the ice. The robotic guardians moved with spider-like grace across the frozen ground and fired energy beams that could melt through solid rock. Human weapons proved effective against their armor, but the creatures kept coming in seemingly endless waves. Major Chris Taylor coordinated the assault from a command post established in an abandoned research station. His tactical displays showed friendly forces advancing toward the main facility, while Void Swarm reinforcements moved to intercept them. The enemy had finally realized that their most important asset was under attack, and was responding with everything they had. Dr. Park worked frantically to boost the power output of her neural disruption device, while explosions shook the Liberties. Science Bay. Void Swarm ships were targeting the human flagship specifically because they recognized the electromagnetic interference coming from her equipment. The biomechanical intelligence had learned to identify threats and eliminate them with ruthless efficiency. Captain Morrison's assault team reached the main entrance to the underground facility and found it sealed by layers of organic armor that pulsed with alien energy. The entire structure seemed alive, with walls that moved and breathed like some massive creature. Corporal Jenny Lewis planted explosive charges, while Private Kelly Foster provided covering fire against approaching enemy drones. Commander Veltar studied the facility's architecture and recognized elements of biomechanical engineering that his people had encountered on other conquered worlds. The Void Swarm built their installations using living tissue that could repair itself and adapt to different threats. Conventional weapons would have limited effect against such defenses. Staff Sergeant Nick Thompson discovered that human flamethrowers were surprisingly effective against the organic barriers. The living walls recoiled from intense heat and chemical fire, creating gaps that the assault team could exploit. Sometimes the simplest solutions worked best against seemingly impossible obstacles. Admiral Kate Williams directed the space battle from the Liberty's bridge, while enemy forces concentrated their attacks on her flagship. The Void Swarm had identified her ship as the source of the electromagnetic interference and was determined to destroy it. Her defensive coordinators worked desperately to maintain shield integrity while Dr. Park continued her crucial work. Lieutenant Tom Bradley monitored energy readings from the polar facility and watched them spike dramatically as the assault team penetrated deeper into the structure. The control node was drawing power from the planet's core itself, using geothermal energy to maintain its quantum network connections across multiple star systems. Destroying it would require more than conventional explosives. Major Taylor received reports that Void Swarm forces throughout the planet were beginning to move toward the polar region. The enemy had abandoned their attacks on civilian shelters and was concentrating everything on defending their command center. This tactical mistake gave human and Zephyrian forces the opportunity they needed to complete the evacuation. Captain Morrison led his team through corridors that seemed to pulse with their own heartbeat, while organic walls contracted around them like the digestive system of some enormous creature. The facility's defenses included biological weapons that released toxic gases and acidic secretions designed to dissolve intruders before they could reach critical systems. Commander Veltar's knowledge of Void Swarm technology proved invaluable as he guided the team through the maze-like interior. His people had studied captured biomechanical devices for months and learned to recognize the patterns that indicated important control systems. The enemy's strength lay in their adaptability, but this also created predictable weaknesses. Amy Chun established a communication relay that allowed the assault team to maintain contact with orbital support despite the heavy interference. Her jury-rigged system used quantum encryption methods that the Void Swarm could not easily jam. Information flowed between ground forces and the fleet, enabling coordinated strikes against enemy positions. Dr. Park's electromagnetic pulse reached maximum intensity just as Void Swarm command ships began their final assault on the human fleet. The neural disruption cascaded through their quantum networks and caused temporary paralysis in thousands of biomechanical drones across the planet. Entire enemy formations stopped moving as their hive mind connections were severed. Sergeant Rodriguez exploited the confusion by leading a flanking attack against the facility's inner defenses while the main assault team advanced through the central corridor. His Marines moved with practiced efficiency through environments that would have terrified most soldiers. Urban combat experience from Earth's conflicts served them well in alien, underground facilities. The team reached the control node chamber and found themselves facing a massive biomechanical brain suspended in a tank of glowing fluid. Cables and organic conduits connected it to similar facilities across the galaxy, creating a network that coordinated Void Swarm operations on dozens of worlds. Destroying this single target would cripple their entire expansion effort. Captain Morrison and Commander Veltar worked together to place Dr. Park's specially designed charges around the chamber while defensive systems tried to stop them. Facility itself seemed to recognize the threat and deployed every weapon at its disposal. Acidic sprays, energy beams, and toxic gases filled the air as they raced against time. Lieutenant Amy Chun reported that Void Swarm reinforcements were approaching the facility entrance in overwhelming numbers. The assault team had perhaps 10 minutes before they would be trapped inside with no hope of escape. The charges needed more time to properly penetrate the biomechanical shielding around the control node. Major Taylor coordinated covering fire from human and Zephyrian units outside the facility while the demolition team completed their work. His forces were badly outnumbered, but fought with desperate courage to buy precious time for their comrades inside. Every second gained might mean the difference between victory and total defeat. Dr. Park detected massive energy fluctuations from the control node as it tried to establish emergency connections with backup facilities. The biomechanical intelligence was attempting to transfer its consciousness to safe locations before the charges detonated. Her electromagnetic weapon worked to prevent this digital evacuation while overloading power systems throughout the complex. Commander Veltar made the ultimate sacrifice by volunteering to remain behind and manually trigger the explosives if the remote detonation system failed. His warrior code demanded that he protect his people regardless of personal cost, and ensuring the destruction of this facility was more important than his own survival. Captain Morrison refused to abandon his alien partner and insisted that they would escape together or not at all. The bond forged between human and Zephyrian warriors transcended species loyalty and had become something approaching brotherhood. They had fought side by side through impossible odds and would face the final challenge together, the explosion. That followed could be seen from orbit as massive quantities of stored energy were released in a single devastating blast. The control node and its surrounding facility vanished in a pillar of fire that reached through the polar ice cap and into the planet's atmosphere. Shockwaves traveled through the ground and shattered void swarm installations across the continent. Sudden loss of their primary coordination center caused immediate chaos in enemy forces throughout the Kepler-442b system. Biomechanical drones that had operated with perfect efficiency suddenly became confused and disorganized. Their adaptive intelligence became a liability when deprived of central guidance, leaving them vulnerable to coordinated attacks. As the dust settled from the massive explosion, both human and Zephyrian forces prepared for the final phase of their joint operation. The tide had turned decisively in their favor, but victory would still require careful coordination and continued sacrifice from both species. The explosion that destroyed the Void Swarm control node sent shockwaves across the entire planet and beyond. Captain Jake Morrison and Commander Veltar emerged from the smoking ruins of the polar facility, their environmental suits damaged, but still functional. The massive blast had created a crater several miles wide in the ice cap, and the aurora-like energy discharges in the sky showed that the enemy's quantum network was collapsing. Lieutenant Amy Chun's communication systems crackled back to life as the electromagnetic interference cleared from the planet's atmosphere. Her first priority was to confirm that both team leaders had survived the explosion. The relief in her voice was clear when Jake's familiar voice came through the static, reporting that the mission was complete and the control node was destroyed. Dr. Lisa Park monitored the cascade failure from her position aboard the UCS Liberty and watched as biomechanical drones across multiple star systems lost their coordination. Her electromagnetic weapon had disrupted local networks, but destroying the primary node caused a chain reaction that affected Void Swarm operations throughout this entire sector of the galaxy. Dozens of worlds would be saved by this single act of destruction. Major Chris Taylor coordinated the final assault on remaining Void Swarm forces while their command structure collapsed around them. Without central guidance, the biomechanical creatures reverted to simple attack patterns that human and Zephyrian forces could easily counter. What had been an unstoppable invasion just hours before was now a cleanup operation. Sergeant Danny Rodriguez led his Marines through the streets of New Zephyr City and witnessed something remarkable happening among the enemy forces. Void Swarm drones that had adapted to counter every weapon the defenders possessed were now standing motionless or wandering aimlessly without purpose. Their hive-mind intelligence had been their greatest strength and their ultimate weakness. Admiral Kate Williams observed the space battle from her flagship bridge and saw Void Swarm command ships attempting to retreat from the system. Her fleet moved to intercept them, while fighter squadrons led by Commander Paul Davis harassed their withdrawal. The biomechanical vessels that had seemed so threatening during their approach now fled like frightened animals. Commander Veltar stood in the ruins of his command bunker and watched the tactical display as red enemy contacts disappeared one by one across his world. The 3-month siege that had brought his people to the edge of extinction was finally ending. Zephyrian civilians began emerging from their underground shelters to see sunlight for the first time in weeks. The cleanup operation took several days as human and Zephyrian forces worked together to eliminate the last pockets of enemy resistance. Staff Sergeant Nick Thompson's demolition teams destroyed abandoned Void Swarm installations, while Corporal Jenny Lewis coordinated refugee assistance programs. The two species had learned to work together so well that communication barriers barely mattered anymore. Captain Morrison found himself appointed as the first human ambassador to the Zephyrian Republic. During a ceremony held in the rebuilt capital city, Commander Valtar presented him with a traditional warrior's medallion, while thousands of grateful civilians watched from the surrounding plaza. The purple-scaled officer had become more than an ally during their shared ordeal. He had become a true friend. Amy Chun established permanent translation protocols that would enable ongoing cooperation between human and Zephyrian governments. Her work during the crisis had created the foundation for diplomatic relations that would benefit both species for generations to come. The musical language of the Zephyrians was now being taught in Earth universities, alongside their own cultural traditions. Dr. Park's research into Void Swarm technology provided crucial intelligence about their expansion methods and biological weaknesses. Her findings were shared with the Galactic Defense Coalition and helped other species prepare defenses against future attacks. The electromagnetic disruption techniques she developed became standard equipment on warships throughout. Known Space. General Pete Davis received a formal commendation from the Terran Council for his decision to authorize military intervention. Even Senator Mary Johnson admitted that his choice had prevented a humanitarian disaster and potentially saved human worlds from future attack. The isolationist policies that had governed Earth for centuries were quietly abandoned in favor of selective engagement. The cost of victory had been significant for both species involved in the conflict. Over 800 human soldiers had died during the liberation of Kepler 442b, while Zephyrian casualties numbered in the thousands. Memorial services were held jointly to honor the fallen warriors who had sacrificed everything for the freedom of people they barely knew. Major Taylor established a permanent military exchange program between human and Zephyrian forces. Officers from both species would train together and share tactical knowledge that might prove useful in future conflicts. The cooperation forged during desperate battle conditions had created bonds of trust that transcended cultural differences. Lieutenant Tom Bradley worked with Zephyrian scientists to study the remains of biomechanical technology left behind by the Void Swarm. Their joint research revealed weaknesses in similar invasion forces and led to the development of new defensive systems. The partnership between human innovation and Zephyrian knowledge proved remarkably effective. The Galactic Defense Coalition formally requested an alliance with Earth after witnessing the effectiveness of human military tactics. Admiral Harrison, who had initially opposed Captain Morrison's unauthorized intervention, now recommended full membership in the galactic community. Humanity's isolation was ending, but on terms that reflected their values and principles. Sergeant Rodriguez established training camps where human Marines taught close-quarters combat techniques to Zephyrian warriors. The urban warfare experience that Earth soldiers had gained during conflicts in their own solar system proved invaluable when adapted for alien environments. Cross-species military cooperation became a model for other alliance members. Commander Veltar traveled to Earth as part of a diplomatic mission and was amazed by humanity's diverse cultures and resilient spirit. His people had always been peaceful by nature, but humans had learned to balance warfare with compassion in ways that impressed the veteran soldier. The warrior codes of both species shared common values despite their different origins. captain. Morrison remained on Kepler 442b for 2 years, helping to rebuild the planet's infrastructure and defense systems. The grateful Zephyrians named a mountain range in his honor and established a memorial garden for all the human soldiers who had died protecting their world. The crystal flowers that grew and were said to sing in harmony with the wind. Amy Chun published a comprehensive guide to interspecies communication that became required reading for diplomatic personnel throughout the galaxy. Her work during the crisis had demonstrated that understanding between different cultures was possible even under the most stressful conditions. Language barriers could be overcome when people were willing to listen and learn. Dr. Park received the Terran Medal of Science for her contributions to xenobiology and military technology. Her electromagnetic disruption systems were installed on defense platforms around every human colony, providing protection against biomechanical threats. The theoretical research she had conducted in peaceful laboratories had proven its worth in actual combat. The reconstruction of New Zephyr City incorporated both human and Zephyrian architectural elements in a unique fusion of styles. The crystal spires that had once reached toward the sky were rebuilt alongside human design, defensive structures that could withstand future attacks. The hybrid city became a symbol of cooperation between species. 5 years after the liberation, Kepler 442b had become one of the most prosperous worlds in the sector. Trade between human and Zephyrian colonies flourished while joint research projects advanced scientific knowledge for both species. A planet that had nearly died became a beacon of hope for other worlds facing similar threats. The Void Swarm never returned to challenge the alliance that had defeated them so decisively. Other biomechanical threats appeared occasionally in distant systems, but the defensive techniques developed during the Kepler 442b conflict proved effective against similar enemies. The galaxy had learned that some invasions could be stopped if civilized species were willing to stand together. General Davis retired from active duty, but continued to serve as an advisor on interstellar military cooperation. His decision to intervene had changed the course of galactic history and established humanity as a major power in the community of intelligent species. The warrior who had risked everything for strangers became a legend in multiple cultures. The memorial wall in New Zephyr City bore the names of every human and Zephyrian soldier who had died during the 3-month siege and final liberation. Families from both worlds came to honor their sacrifice and remember that freedom sometimes required the ultimate price. Their courage had saved not just one planet, but potentially the entire galaxy from conquest. As the years passed, the story of humanity's first interstellar military intervention became part of the folklore of dozens of species.